hear me? If you can hear me, could you please write yes in the box, in the chat box? Perfect. Oh, great. I can see a lot of yeses. Perfect. Um, Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Today we are going to do webinar number 1 on how to improve your corrections. So if you are able to see the text box as well as the PowerPoint, could you please also say yes? Great. Okay, I can see many yeses. This is always good. Perfect. Right, so just to let you know, you will have opportunities to participate throughout the webinar. And if you have any comments or have any ideas, please feel free to write them in the text box as you are doing now. You will also have time at the end if you would like to ask any questions or share any thoughts, and I will try my best to answer those as well. So this is only a voice recording. You will not see me, but you will see the PowerPoint that we will go through. Right, so we are going to start the PowerPoint. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sofia Lily, and I have been working in education for about 6 years. I was one of the academic managers at EF London over the summer, and I taught many of the classes there. I have completed my degree, my CELTA certificate, as well as my degree in education studies. I have taught in Spain and in England to children and adults of all different levels and backgrounds, and have been managing an English school in Spain for over a year. So very lovely to meet you all, and welcome. I would really like if you could all write in the text box where you're from and what you do, if you're a teacher or if you're a manager or if you're what it is you're doing. It would be great to know a bit about you. I'll just give you a few minutes for you to write in the text box. Perfect. So I can see some teachers from Italy, Vietnam, Romania, Russia. Very nice. Perfect. Great. So I'm sure you'll be able to share quite a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today as a teacher. So, right, we're going to carry on with the PowerPoint. Can you all hear me well? Okay, I can try and speak a bit louder if that's better. Perfect. Great. So, as you all know, we are going to talk about improving your corrections as a teacher. So why is it important to know about improving your corrections? What do you think? What do you all think? If you could just write just one simple comment on why you think it's important. To reflect, yes, great. For getting feedback, of course, it's a very good way of doing it. Makes people stronger. Good comment there. Builds student self-esteem. Great. Yes, and to see if they've learned. Very good, yeah. Great, so I'm going to show you just a few examples that I've come up with, that I've been able to get from other teachers that I have taught with and observed previously. So as you can see here, it's important, as some of you said, to give effective feedback, because if you give effective feedback, it means that you are a top-class teacher, as you will be able to communicate to your students what it is they need and to be able to help them. And I think it's an art form that every top class tutor should perfect. I think it's very, very important for them to be able to have as a teacher. Um, what else? So, the student feelings after a feedback. I think it's also very important to know how the students might feel after a feedback. Because if a student receives poor feedback, then they might decide not to even turn up or look forward to the next class. However, if a student receives great feedback during the lesson, I'm sure they will walk out the door feeling confident and motivated to keep on improving. So I think it's very important to take into account the student's feelings after a feedback. It's also important to have quality lessons and high quality feedback. So it's very important to help them with their corrections, as this will definitely make sure that you are having a good quality feedback, and it will improve the students' quality as well as the teacher. And yes, as I can see here, it does. Some of you are saying that it helps them to build a good rapport and to feel confident, and it is very, very useful. Perfect, great. Going on to the next slide. So, what do you all think? Should every mistake be corrected? No, I can see a long no there. No, no, no. Really? Okay, good. Good ideas. Good. Well, one of you said yes there. No, I think it's very important to correct the mistakes that are vital, that will make a difference to the student. But we will see here the different ones that I'm going to talk about. So here, I think it's very important to ask your student how they would like to be corrected. Do you think? What do you all think? Do you think this is something that it's important to take into account? Could we ask them how they would like to be corrected? I think it might sound obvious, but it's a good thing to ask your students how they like to be corrected. They might actually have a clear idea of this, and it will make everything easier. So one of the things I saw a teacher do once was when the student had made a mistake, the teacher would give the student a strip of card with colors green, orange, and red. So if you listen carefully, I will give you a bit of a tip. So the student would then point at the color they preferred the correction to be like. So in this case, we had red, which meant don't correct me at all. Orange, correct things which are really important or things I should know. And green, correct me as much as you can. So in this case, we would be asking the student, from using 3 different colors, in which way they would like to be corrected. We would also be looking at are you working on accuracy or on fluency? So do we know how this could relate to correcting a student? Of course, yes. So it's very important to take both into account. So before you begin an activity, for example, it's important to know exactly if you are doing it through accuracy or for fluency. So for a class discussion, for example, fluency would be appropriate. And the important thing is that students are expressing themselves and thinking on their feet. However, if the students have time to prepare and role play, and they are going to perform, you might want to encourage accuracy. Sorry. So you have to be clear in the aims of the task and make sure that students are aware of what you are expecting from them. So whether it's accuracy or it's fluency. Great, so I can see some of you are working on this with your own students, and I think this is very important. But it's very important when correcting students for it to be through accuracy or through fluency, but ideally both, as you are all saying. So it's also very important to take into account self-correction and peer correction. So I'm sure you as teachers do use this with your students, and I think it's very important to know that a student can often correct themselves when they realize they've made a mistake. So sometimes the mistake is simply a slip, and they are aware of the correct version. Everyone makes mistakes, and I think students themselves are actually able to correct themselves. And I think this is very important to allow the student to correct themselves if they are capable of it. And then we can also give the students a chance and time to for them to realize and auto-correct themselves. So often by just raising your eyebrows or repeating the mistake, the students will know what you mean, and that way they will be able to correct the error themselves. So all teachers have different ways of correcting, but these, I think, are things that we should always take into account. So also the students are able to correct to one another. So peer correction is very important, as I can see some of you are saying. It's a different way of being able to correct. So in this case, peer correction often helps to create a positive class atmosphere, as students realize you are not the only source of error correction, and that way they can learn a lot from another person. So I think it's good to variate the fact that they can self-correct as well as correct with their peers, because this way they are able to help each other, and the combination of the two, as I can see, is some of you are saying, is very important. So maybe first self-correction, and if they can't work it out themselves, that's when peer correction can jump in. So correction slots. I'm not too sure if you all know about this, but I have come across this and seen this with several teachers, and many of the teachers do correction slots. So this is one way to focus on students' mistakes and taking time out of an activity and look at the mistakes as a group. So by doing correction slots, you are able to focus as a group on the mistakes that one or others might make, because it will always help other people. So I often, for example, when teaching, monitor the students and listen on to what they're saying, and I will write down notes, and at the end of the class, whether it's pronunciation, grammatical or lexical, I will then write these on the board, and as a group, the students will correct their mistakes. So this can also be a way of correcting the students. So, one big question, who can correct? I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I'd like you to tell me who do you think could correct a student? Good, so I can see self-correction first, teachers, peer correction. Yes, of course. So we're going to go through the ones that I wrote down. So the student, as some of you have said, the student could be the first person to correct themselves. Then their peers. I think as we have previously mentioned, it is very important to take into account the fact that their peers are always available, and they should be, and you should always, as a teacher, encourage this to be able to help your students. And it is very important for the teachers to know that they aren't the only people who can correct a mistake. And then, of course, the teacher. We as teachers can always help, but it's always also good to give the student a moment in order for them to find a solution. And then the course book or the reference material. So this is always a good way of double checking your work, and if you find an incorrection, there's always, I'm sure, ways of finding the solution or the correction in the course book or the reference material that they are looking at. So I think it is very important to take into account the fact that everyone should help out in order to correct, but the student and their peers, I believe, should be the ones to go first. So their peers, as we did mention before, play an important part, as they are in the same learning process as the student making the mistake. In fact, as a group, there might be students making the same mistakes as before. If one student learns from their mistake, they are able to help those making the same mistakes. And then, of course, the teacher. So as you are all mentioning, it's very important to have a big variation on who can correct, and the reference materials and the course books is always a good thing. But normally what you would think is the teacher is the first person to help them correct. But I think it is very important to take into account the student, the peers, and the course book is also a way of helping a correction. So can anyone think of another way of correcting? So apart from the students, the peers, the teacher, and the course book, could anyone think about any other way of correcting? The internet, that's a good one. Parents and siblings, yes. The dictionary, great one. Of course, yes. So there are many other ways of being able to correct yourself and to correct mistakes that a student might make. So definitely, yes, the internet could also be a way. Dictionaries, big fan of those. Family members, very good ideas here. Very good ideas. Great. So we are now going to have a look at 5 powerful ways that I believe correcting a student. So can anyone think of a way out of very simple ways to correct a student? And what would be the first way that you would correct a student if they make a mistake? It is normal to say positive things. Very good. Asking another student. Asking them to reflect on it. Yes, good. Board the mistake and make them see it on the board. Yes, underline the mistake. Perfect. So very, very good ideas here. Get them to repeat and think about it. Self-correction. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to show you what 5 powerful ways I believe are good. So number 1, as I have seen you have already said, is to reflect on their work. So this is a very, very important thing that will help the students recognize the mistakes they make, and this they will be able to do without even thinking. And it also helps the student develop their critical thinking skills. And it also involves your students in the learning process and gives them some responsibility. So they are able to take responsibility themselves and reflect on what they have done right and what they have done wrong, and where they will be able to improve the next time or correct themselves. So this is a very, very good way of being able to correct a student. One other way that I think is also very good is to praise them. So we have to be careful with this, but I'm going to be very direct in what I mean. So you have to be, when a student does something right, you should praise them and you should tell them how well they've done. And if they have made the good correction, then you should also praise them and give them a good feedback. So you will never actually imagine how much they actually remember every bit of positive feedback that you give them. So even by giving them a smile and telling them how well they've done it, I am sure they will go back happier, very happy home, by knowing they've done something correct. And this will encourage them to be able to feel more confident and do things the right way. However, it is important not to give them too much because it will become meaningless. So it is important to use it correctly. However, never praise by a mistake or an error in order to give them a confidence boost, as this will not help them learn. So it is important to praise them, but you have to know how to do it in a necessary way. So you will help them in their confidence, and you help them realize they are capable of doing something, but you have to be careful when praising them, as some students might want to be praised when they haven't done the correction. That would not be reasonable. So it is important to praise them, and which will help them and it will encourage them to correct themselves. But just be very careful when praising them. One other thing that I think is important and a good, powerful way of correcting a student is to give understandable feedback. So some of you, I'm sure, might have a master's in English language or something very similar, but you have to remember that your student doesn't. So make sure you grade your language level and you don't use technical words they won't understand. Explain the mistakes in a simple and clear way, because this way the students will be able to relate and understand, and that way progress much faster. So I think very, very important is to make sure they understand when you give them the feedback, because although they might be nodding and saying yes, yes, they understand, they might not be understanding. So it is important to give them understandable feedback and maybe even double check that they have understood the correction. This is quite a funny one, sandwiching corrections. So unfortunately, this has nothing to do with an actual sandwich. This is a psychological hack which helps students learn from their mistakes and boost their confidence. So you might have heard of this before or not, but this is mainly what teachers will use when the students are struggling and might be falling behind in school a little. So it is a way of making sure they are feeling confident with themselves, and that they are able to do much better than they think. So the first thing that you do is you praise the student when they do something well, and then you highlight and correct a mistake that they made. And then you praise the student again for what they did well for the second time. We will go into this a bit more detail, just so you know, on the next slide. And visual clues. So I'm not sure if you all know, obviously, about this, but it's actually something that we use without knowing about it. And we normally use visual clues throughout our teaching. And sometimes it's actually a good way to correct the student through something visual. So have you ever heard or applied any of these with your students? Oh, perfect. Good. So you have heard of what we have um, looked at then. Great. So let's look at it in a bit more depth because you might not have all been able to hear me properly or understood. So reflecting on their work. So this will obviously make sure that the student will develop their critical thinking skills and give them some responsibility. And this, remember, is something that we should allow the student individually to do. And if that doesn't work, then they can always um, go to their peers, and if not, that's what the teacher is there for, to be able to help them. But I think it is very important to encourage reflecting on their own work. So the second one is praise the student. So as we said, it is very important to be honest, but at the same time make sure that you haven't given them too much praise, as it will then become meaningless. But it's important to use it correctly. And of course, positive feedback equals raising self-confidence. Understandable feedback. So this is something we have to make sure that we are clear to what it is we are telling the students. And it is very important to grade our language level and be very, very simple, because this way they will be able to understand and improve on the understanding. So sandwiching corrections. In case some of you didn't understand, sandwiching corrections is normally, as I am highlighting here on the description, is to praise, highlight, and praise again. So first, you should make sure to praise the student when they have done something well, and then you highlight and correct a mistake they made. And then again, you will praise the student for what they did well for the second time. So you praise, highlight, praise. And this, of course, will help. It's more of a psychological hack which helps the students learn from their mistakes and, of course, boost their confidence. And this is mainly for those who are struggling and might be falling behind in school a little. And then, of course, visual clues. So this is actually might be one of my favorites because I think it's very good to variate the correction techniques. And sometimes teachers think their voices is enough, but actually it isn't. And visual clues add a little variety to correction techniques. And actually, for some learners, this is more effective. So, for example, post-it notes. For example, something that you can write a little note on a piece of paper and stick it somewhere on a colored piece of paper. This is always a good way of making the students realize and visualize something, or getting even colored counters, for example, and using things that are bright and things that they will visualize and remember. And also, one of the things you could do is you could raise a red pen when a student makes a mistake and give them a moment to see if they can correct themselves. So if you've realized that a student has made a mistake when talking or when writing, then what you could do is lift a red pen up, and this is where it would be a warning in order for them to know that they have done something slightly incorrect. And then they will correct themselves. And as I can see quite a lot of your comments, it is very important to use visual clues. And obviously it does depend on the student's level, on the way you use these visual clues, but they normally find them very useful, and it can be as simple as you want, really, and it's very, very interesting to see how students are able to benefit from these visual clues and understand the corrections that you are giving them. So now we're going to go on to an example of a situation in an English class. So this moment will probably take up about 5 or 10 minutes, but I'd like you to think about the different ways that we will be able to solve this situation. So, in a sentence, in a sentence structure class, a lower intermediate A2 B1 12-year-old student writes a sentence in her English book, and it says, "People from Spain is very friendly." So we can clearly see there is a mistake here. And of course, we don't really know, but for people that are learning English, they can find it very difficult to use the verb, to use these verbs. And one of the most common mistakes when learning English is actually the verb to be. So if you were in a class and your student would write this in their English book when you are coming up with sentences, how would you, in what way would you correct her? So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes just so you could think how you would correct her. Good, to identify the subject, underline the mistake, point to the wrong word, okay, talk quietly and underline the mistakes, understandable feedback, good, circle the word, yes. Perfect, okay, yes. So, if we were to circle the word, or in this situation would obviously be is. So in this situation, people from Spain is very friendly. A good way to do this would also be by emphasizing on the word they have made a mistake on. So you could tap, actually. One of the things that I have seen teachers do before is they will clap with every word and leave the word that they have got wrong in the middle without a clap. So, people from Spain, very friendly. So in this case, we will miss out the word that she has got wrong. And in this way, she will be able to realize that she has made a mistake. Great. So, in this case, we would be verbally emphasizing on the word that is incorrect, or simply leaving it out. So I will repeat what it is I've said about correcting them verbally through this sentence. So I clap on every word that they have correct, and then I will be quiet for the word they have got wrong. So people from Spain, very friendly. So we have left the word out that she has got wrong. So remember your tone when you are telling them this, and don't tell them the answer just yet. It's a good way of trying to get the individual to correct themselves. And in this case, it could be by showing them on the board, for example, or underlining how some of you have said. And then you would maybe explain the fact that is would be single, would mean one person, and are would be plural, which would be more than one. So then you could give her the option. Is it are or is it is? And then you would let her decide. Um, and in that way, she will realize are would be a plural thing. So she would end up correcting herself. Um, Another way would be through visual clues. So you could show this girl called Maria what word she got incorrect by using your fingers. Then you could remind her of the difference between is and are. So on your fingers, if you hold up 6 fingers, you would do people, one finger, from, another finger, Spain, another finger, and then number 4, fourth finger, would be is, which is the incorrect one. So through visual one, you would tell her that number 4, the word number 4, is incorrect. And you could tell her to try and correct number 4 with your fingers. So in this case, it would be people from Spain are very friendly. And in this way, you will realize that she will rephrase the sentence and correct herself in the right way. And the focus here would be on the verb form. So I can see here some of you are saying that it's also important to use facial expressions along with the fingers. Of course, it's very important to use facial expressions, and that way they will also see that it is not the end of the world because they've got something wrong, and you will be able to give them a smile when they get it right. But it's also a good way, as some of you were saying, to give her some answers to choose from. So you could say, people from Spain, and then maybe give her an option would be are, is, or they, and she could probably choose from those 3 which one she thinks is correct. Perfect. So, it is very important to know that English as a language it has a lot of room for error. And it is very difficult to learn an English as a second language, and there are a lot of verbs that have to be learned. So this is not, I'm sure you as teachers have come across this type of problem before, and I'm sure you have corrected it in a good way, but this is giving you a different types of example that you would be able to correct them. Right, so to conclude, I would like you to remember that your students always will make mistakes. And it's important to keep the experience positive for the learner and try and always vary your correction methods. And maybe even taking into consideration the ways we looked previously, such as reflecting on the work, praising the student, sandwich corrections, and visual clues. And this way you will make not only your job easier, but you will ensure your classes are more effective. So could you all please give me one of the methods that we have spoken about that you have found most interesting? I can go back to the slides that we were looking at so we can talk more about this. So which one do you think is one of the most important ones? I can see sandwiching corrections is a good way. Yes. So one of the things about sandwiching corrections is that it's a way of making sure the student is involved and that they can feel they have the confidence because they will do something right. And in this case, you will be helping them and praising them, and then you will just let them know they have done something wrong, and then you will praise them again for doing it right. And this is always a good way of making sure they're self-confident, and that they will be able to use and get better. So yes, of course, it depends on the situation, and every situation is different. But I think it is very important if you take these into consideration when correcting a student. And it isn't easy to correct a student, and I think it is very important to know that not everyone is everyone takes a feedback differently. So if you can variate the way that you correct a student, I think this will help the student and yourself to find a different way of correcting. So have you or any of you got any ideas that you would like to share with the rest of the group of different ways other than these that we could correct our students? Okay, so yes, all of them are very useful. Okay, so Paula says, I like delayed error correction for speaking classes. Yes, of course, that's always a very good way of saying it, of correcting, sorry. As we did mention before, by monitoring around the classroom, you will be able to take down notes and that way refer to them at the end of the class and correct them as a group. So that's also a very good idea. Yes. So it depends. It always depends on the levels and on the cases that we have, that you have. Um, oh, right. Someone says about competition. Yes. So competition in correction is good. However, you do have to be careful when correcting students doing it through competition because you never really know how some students can react upon that. But if it works with your classes, that's great. And emphasizing makes students emphasizing on mistakes is also a good way of correcting them. Yes, good one. Yes, the correction game. So some of you will, I'm sure, do it differently, but there are lots of different ways of doing the correction games, and you can actually do it by reflecting on their work or praising a student. So one big good example would be when a student does something correct, you could give them something like a ticket to or just a small piece of paper that gives them points, and point systems are also a very good way. I'm not sure if you have been through doing it, as if any of you have used point systems, but these are always a good way of making sure the students are getting their own ways correct, and that they are making an effort, and that they will be able to find ways of correcting themselves because they know they will gain points. So that would be a way of praising the student through making sure you are giving them points, for example. Paraphrase the wrong sentence in the correct way. Yes, that's also a good way of doing it. Yeah. Yes, correction games. I can see you all are saying a little about correction games. That's definitely a good way, and I'm sure you all have different ways of making sure that that correction games are effective with your students. Yeah, a small gift like candy. Yeah, sometimes by praising a student, you are able to, you might be able to give them candy. Depends on the situation, but that's always a good way of making sure they will do something correct, or by helping them, giving them positive feedback, and this will raise their self confidence, as we have mentioned earlier. Check in the next lesson. Yeah, that's also a good way of making sure they have corrected their mistakes and they have recognized it. Give them one bonus. Yes, a bonus, 1 mark. That's also a very good way of doing it. You can also create charts, which you can have on the wall with the names and the students' number next to it of how many stars they are having and how many corrections they have. That's great. Identify the mistakes and correct them. Yes, very good. Great, good. Flashcards are great. Yes, of course. Okay, so I'll just go back to the conclusion. Um, and I would just want to ask you if you have any questions for me about anything that we have discussed previously. Great. Thank you. Everything is clear. You've enjoyed it. It's very good to hear. We still have about 10 minutes left before we finish. So I thought I would leave here to ask me any questions or share any of your ideas. Um, and then on the next slide, you will see a link where you can click and answer a question in order to receive a certificate of attendance. So I will put that on in about 5 minutes. And please tell me if you have any questions. We have about 5 or 10 minutes left if you would like to ask me any questions. Okay, great. Everything is clear then. So I will put the link on for you all to see. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Just make sure to click on the link and answer the question in order to get your final certificate, and I'm sure you will all be able to answer the correct answer. So good luck with everyone, and thank you very much. Bye.